Chapter 8. From the din inside, it was almost impossible to hear the knock on the door. Wiping the frustrated tears from her eyes, Doreen scrambled to peer around the corner of the living room window. A massive crowd remained outside. If anything, it appeared to be larger. She glared at them from her hidden position. But someone at the door pounded again. The whole darn frame seemed to shake at that movement. She peered around the corner, but all she could see was someone big, and she chewed on her bottom lip, wondering if she should answer. By this point Muggs thought he should add to the noise again. He barked and barked and barked. What now? I'll never get to eat at this rate. If for no other reason than to shut him up, she walked to the front door. With her chin held high, she flung it open. And her jaw dropped. A man, huge, broad, sexy as hell, and a bit older than she was, filled the doorway. He looked at her and smiled and asked, "Doreen Montgomery, I presume?" She stared at him suspiciously. "How do you know my name?" "I work with law enforcement. So I already know who you are. Besides, you're in Nan Montgomery's house." "But my married name was Merriweather." "Have you reverted back to your maiden name?" "Paperwork is in progress," she admitted. "But Montgomery's the only name I'll answer to now." He motioned to the living room behind her. "May I come in?" She crossed her arms over her chest and glared at him. "Why?" He laughed. That made her even more suspicious. "Are you just one of the many who wants to come here and gawk?" "Hell no, I don't. I'm the investigating officer for the serious crime unit here in town." She bolted backward. "Does that mean I'm a suspect?" She outstretched her arms as if to ward off an attack. "I didn't do anything, honest." Then she stopped and stared at him suspiciously. "Do I need a lawyer to talk to you?" "Whoa, take it easy." "No. You are not a suspect, but more of a witness after the fact. My brother is a lawyer, if you want to talk to one. I almost went to law school with him." He smiled reassuringly at her. "We both work on the side of the good guys." "There is no such thing when it comes to a lawyer," she snapped. She narrowed her gaze at him and asked, "ID?" He raised an eyebrow, pulled out his wallet from his back pocket, and extracted a card from inside. With 2 fingers, he held it out to her. She read it. Mac Moreau. He looked like a man called Mac should look, as he was the size of a freaking Mack truck. And the card presented him as Corporal Moreau of the Kelowna RCMP Serious Crime Unit. So at least he was who he said he was. If that made any difference. "Why are you here, and do I need to get a lawyer of my own choosing?" Yet, she had absolutely zero trust in them at this point in her life. He shook his head. "No, you don't. Things are done very casually here. I came to welcome you to our town, and to see what the hell was going on in your backyard. More cops will be here anytime now." "More cops?" She waved at her backyard. "How can there possibly be more cops working for this small town? They're all in my backyard already. A lot of times, we deputize civilians if we need them." She stared at him as the information computed in her brain. "So you can deputize me to work in my own garden?" At that, he gave a boisterous laugh. "Well, if it wasn't your garden and there wasn't a body found on your property, without that conflict of interest, if you are in fit physical form to assist us as needed for the case, then it's possible." She stared at him, disgruntled. "I'm fit." His gaze went from the top of her no longer coiffed hair all the way down her very bedraggled suit, to Nan's pink garden shoes on her feet. In a very gentle voice he said, "It looks like you've had a very difficult day." He motioned to the kitchen. "Why don't we put on a cup of tea?" She couldn't decide if he was being patronizing or compassionate. She decided she'd had enough of the bad guys, and she'd take his compassion if it were there. Fine. But watch out for Muggs and Goliath. She turned to find the giant of a man busy rubbing Muggs's belly as he lay on his back, his stubby legs in the air, a serious groan coming from his mouth. I don't think I've ever heard him make that sound before. She stared at the man and shook her head. I suppose you think you can charm anyone? Nope. But dogs are easy. How do you feel about cats? Goliath snuck around the corner of the hallway toward Mac. He gave the cat a great big scratch on its back and under its chin. And just like that, he'd won over Goliath too, as the traitor dropped to the floor and purred like a lion. Doreen stared at Mac. He had an affinity for animals she'd never really had a chance to explore before today. How's Thaddeus? Mac straightened and walked toward Doreen, glancing over at Thaddeus on the tree post. I'm used to seeing him on that roost all the time. He seems to like that place. She put on the tea kettle, grateful she knew how to do that much. Too bad she hadn't made any coffee. She'd have it to offer him now. But what would she serve him with the tea? I haven't had a chance to go shopping yet, she said. I wasn't sure the crowd outside would let me. If they're bothering you, I can have them dispersed. She faced him. Can you? Sure. They're just curious. Those are all your neighbors, plus a few from surrounding neighborhoods, it seems. They want to know what's going on. They're harmless enough. How can you tell? One of them might be the murderer. Isn't it true that murderers often stick around when the police arrive at the scenes of their crimes? Usually with a fresh one. Not so much when it's been buried for a while. Although this one is a relatively recent murder, as I understand, flesh is still on the bones. He tilted his head toward her. But you are correct in that criminals do return to their crime scenes. And they do seem to enjoy watching everybody scurry around to solve the mystery. I thought so. She opened the tea drawer. I don't know what tea to serve you. How about coffee instead? She eyed him suspiciously. She had heard the hopeful tone in his voice. The coffee maker is right there. Feel free. He walked over, swung out a basket from the top of the coffee maker she hadn't known existed, and dumped out its contents in the trash can under the sink. He opened the drawer below the coffee maker, pulled out a coffee filter, stuck one in, and then reached for a bag of coffee. And she didn't even know it had been coffee. She walked over and studied the bag. Nothing on it says coffee. She felt his stare of surprise. He quietly said in a calm voice, "It says espresso." She nodded. I read that. I didn't realize that was the same kind of coffee one could use to make coffee in a coffee maker. Absolutely. Espresso makes some of the best coffee. Good, because I really could use a cup. She walked over to the table and sagged into a chair. At that moment, Thaddeus decided to walk across the kitchen floor, strutting his stuff, but coming from the other side of the kitchen. Where the heck were you? She asked in an accusing tone. Thaddeus is here. Thaddeus is here. He ruffled his feathers and jumped onto the table. And then she got it. She leaned forward and studied the dog food. You were in the cupboard eating all the dog food, weren't you? Thaddeus is here. Thaddeus is here. You might not be for long though, she threatened. Thaddeus is a long-term character around this place. Mac walked over and brushed the side of the African Grey's cheek. Hello, Thaddeus. How are you doing? Thaddeus lifted a foot to the man's finger, bobbed his head, proceeded to hop on, and then walked all the way up to Mac's shoulder where he sat quite comfortably. Thaddeus is fine. Thaddeus is fine. Glad to hear that, big guy. I'm sure it's been a pretty tough adjustment for you not having Nan around. Nan is gone. Nan is gone. But Thaddeus's tone of voice had changed to a soulful mourn, so much so that Doreen could feel his grief. Nan is not gone, she reassured Thaddeus. Remember, I took you to see Nan today. Did you? How is she? Doreen looked over at Mac and said, honestly, she seems quite happy there. I was expecting her to be in worse shape. Mac pulled out a chair beside Doreen. As he sat down, Thaddeus maintained his position perfectly on his shoulder. The smell of coffee filled the air. She turned and looked at Mac. I should have asked earlier. How much coffee did you put in? 2 scoops, he said without missing a beat. And the scoops inside the bag. She stored that information away for later. She so wanted to learn to make a decent cup of coffee. Even if it took her 10 pots to get there. She was a little desperate for her caffeine. And your relationship with Nan? Her gaze focused on him, her mood mellower now that she knew coffee was coming. My grandmother. She's the only family I have left. I didn't get to see her very much when I was married. We did phone a lot though. She smiled. Nan used to tell me how her life was busy and not to worry if I didn't have more time for her. Did you believe her? No, I think she often said that to make me feel better. Doreen looked at him. My marriage wasn't exactly the easiest. Nan seemed to call at my low points. She always cheered me up. Just hearing her voice made me happy. She was also the one who constantly told me how I had choices in life. Did you agree with her? There was no probing. His questions just seemed like simple curiosity. So she answered him the same way. At the time, no. When you're in the middle of a situation, it's very hard to see options. But now I can laugh and realize, looking back over the years, how upsetting the situation was, and yet, how many options I did have at the time. I wish I'd listened to her earlier. At the last gurgle of the coffee pot, Mac nudged his shoulder, and Thaddeus walked to the table. Mac rose and filled 2 mugs with coffee, bringing them back to the kitchen table. I think everyone feels that way at some time or another about their lives. And if they're smart, they'll listen to the advice given to them by those who are older and wiser. Her gaze fell on Thaddeus, busy preening himself. After all, he had just finished eating the dog food. Time to clean himself afterward, right? I'm surprised Nan didn't find a home for her pets though. Except for one thing, Max said quietly. She did find a home for them. She raised her gaze, startled at his words. Me. When he nodded, she laughed. I meant a good home. He tilted his head to the side and studied her carefully. And why is it you can't provide them a good home? I have no idea how. I haven't had to provide for myself until now, and at this point in time with 3 animals. But you're resourceful. You're a survivor. You can do this. She openly stared at him. And she had to wonder. Was he right? One thing she did know. He was too handsome, too suave to believe most of the time. But maybe those most recent words from him were just what she needed to hear.